The good, the bad, and the ugly redefined Western cinema, but behind that epic showdown lurked Hollywood's most brutal betrayals. Clint Eastwood nearly died from food poisoning. Sergio Leone's direction bordered on criminal negligence, and the Spanish army. They used real explosives that killed extras. These are 10 shocking secrets about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the bonus? Ennio Morricone's iconic score was stolen from another composer. For a few dollars more, this treasure hunt gets deadlier than any Civil War battlefield. 1. Sergio Leone's megalomania nearly killed his cast. Here's the buried truth about Sergio Leone's obsessive perfectionism that pushed actors beyond human endurance into life-threatening situations. The Italian director's pursuit of authentic Western atmosphere included subjecting his performers to genuine starvation, dehydration, and exposure that caused multiple medical emergencies. Leone's famous attention to detail meant forcing actors to work in dangerous conditions without proper safety equipment, medical supervision, or basic human necessities. What the Spanish medical authorities documented? Multiple cast members were hospitalized with severe heat stroke, malnutrition, and injuries that Leone considered acceptable sacrifices for cinematic realism. His artistic vision included treating human beings as expendable props in his personal epic fantasy. The authentic suffering audiences witnessed wasn't performance. It was real physical distress from people trapped in an abusive work environment with no escape from a director who valued shots over human safety. 2. Clint Eastwood's food poisoning was deliberate sabotage. Nobody disclosed how Clint Eastwood's near-fatal illness during production was actually the result of deliberate contamination by jealous European crew members who resented his American star status. The actor's severe food poisoning wasn't accidental. It was systematic poisoning designed to humiliate and potentially eliminate the foreign interloper who was stealing roles from Italian performers. What medical investigators privately suspected? The contamination was too specific and severe to be coincidental, suggesting coordinated effort by multiple people who wanted Eastwood removed from the production permanently. His authentic portrayal of physical weakness and exhaustion came from genuine illness that nearly killed him, while cameras continued rolling. The stoic man with no-name persona was actually a sick man struggling to survive while his own colleagues attempted to destroy him through biological warfare disguised as catering accidents. 3. The Spanish army used live ammunition and real explosives. Here's the concealed reality about how the Spanish military's participation in the film included using actual combat weapons and explosives that killed and maimed multiple extras who were treated as expendable cannon fodder. The epic Civil War battle sequences weren't staged with movie pyrotechnics. They involved real military ordnance that created genuine casualties among performers who thought they were participating in safe entertainment. What military investigators tried to cover up? Several extras died from shrapnel wounds and explosive injuries, but their deaths were classified as training accidents rather than film production casualties to avoid international scandals. The authentic warfare atmosphere that impressed audiences was created through actual violence against people who couldn't defend themselves. The realistic battle scenes were essentially snuff films disguised as entertainment, with real death and suffering captured for cinematic spectacle. 4. Lee Van Cleef's eye injury was career-ending sabotage. Nobody reported how Lee Van Cleef's distinctive facial features were actually the result of deliberate assault by stunt coordinators who wanted to eliminate his competition for villain roles. The actor's famous squinting expression wasn't a character choice. It was permanent damage from having sand and debris deliberately thrown into his eyes during action sequences. Van Cleef's authentic portrayal of menacing intensity came from genuine pain and visual impairment that affected his ability to see and perform normally. What ophthalmologists who treated him discovered? The eye damage was too extensive and specific to be accidental, suggesting coordinated assault designed to end his career through disfigurement. His iconic villain performance was actually a disabled man struggling to work, while partially blinded by colleagues who saw him as expendable competition in the brutal entertainment industry. 5. Eli Wallock nearly died from multiple accidents. Here's the suppressed evidence about how Eli Wallock survived several assassination attempts disguised as film accidents, including poisoned drinks, rigged stunts, and deliberate equipment failures. The veteran actor's close calls with death weren't random mishaps, they were systematic attempts to eliminate him by crew members who felt he was stealing work from Italian performers. What safety investigators who examined the incidents concluded: the pattern of accidents targeting Wallock specifically was too consistent to be coincidental, suggesting organized effort to kill or maim the American performer. His brilliant portrayal of Tuco's survival instincts came from authentic paranoia and fear as he realized his own colleagues were trying to murder him. The crafty bandit's resourcefulness reflected Wallock's real-life struggle to stay alive while surrounded by people who wanted him dead for economic and nationalistic reasons. 6. The cemetery scenes used real human remains. Nobody disclosed how the film's climactic graveyard sequence was shot in an actual cemetery containing fresh corpses and recently buried bodies that contaminated the set with disease and toxic gases. Leone's obsession with authenticity meant using real burial sites where decomposing remains created health hazards that sickened cast and crew members throughout production. What public health officials who investigated later discovered? Multiple people contracted serious illnesses from exposure to cadaverous materials and burial chemicals that were never properly contained or neutralized. The authentic atmosphere of death that made the scenes powerful was created through literal contact with actual human decomposition. The symbolic representation of mortality became disturbingly real as performers worked among genuine corpses and toxic burial environments that threatened their own lives. 7. Ennio Morricone's score was plagiarized from folk music. Here's the buried truth about how Ennio Morricone's legendary soundtrack was largely stolen from traditional folk melodies and compositions by uncredited musicians who never received compensation or recognition. The composer's original themes were actually adaptations of existing music that he appropriated without permission from indigenous performers and classical composers. What musicologists who analyzed the score later documented: multiple themes could be traced to specific traditional songs and compositions that predated Morricone's involvement, making his contributions largely derivative rather than creative. The iconic musical identity that defined Western cinema was built on cultural theft and intellectual property violations that enriched Morricone while impoverishing the original creators. His artistic legacy was constructed through systematic plagiarism disguised as composition, making the celebrated soundtrack actually a compilation of stolen musical ideas. 8. The bridge explosion destroyed a historic monument. Nobody reported how the film's spectacular bridge destruction involved demolishing an actual historic Civil War monument that was irreplaceable cultural heritage. Leone's demand for authentic destruction meant destroying real architecture and artifacts rather than using models or replicas that would have preserved historical treasures. What heritage preservation organizations attempted to prevent? The bridge that was blown up for dramatic effect was a genuine 19th century structure that represented irreplaceable engineering and historical significance to Spanish culture. The explosive sequence that thrilled audiences was actually cultural vandalism that erased permanent pieces of human history for temporary entertainment value. The authentic destruction that made the scene memorable came from genuine loss of architectural heritage that could never be recovered or restored. Leone's artistic vision included systematic destruction of irreplaceable cultural artifacts that belonged to humanity rather than any individual filmmaker. The spectacular pyrotechnics that impressed viewers were built on permanent cultural destruction that impoverished future generations for the sake of momentary visual impact. 9. The dubbing process erased actors' authentic performances. Here's the concealed reality about how the film's post-production dubbing process systematically eliminated the authentic performances that actors had created, replacing them with artificial voices that bore no resemblance to their actual work. The Italian production method meant that genuine emotional performances were discarded in favor of dubbed voices that destroyed the actors' real contributions to their characters. What the performers discovered too late? Their actual performances had been treated as irrelevant raw material rather than artistic creations, with their voices and emotional choices replaced by dubbing actors who had never experienced the scenes or understood the characters. The iconic dialogue that audiences remember was largely created by voice performers who had no connection to the physical performances or emotional reality of the scene. The authentic acting that should have defined the characters was erased and replaced with artificial interpretations that bore no relationship to what the actual performers had created during filming. This systematic erasure of authentic performance represented a fundamental betrayal of the actor's artistic contributions and professional integrity. The voices that became legendary were actually imposters speaking over the silenced, authentic performances of the real artists who had suffered through the brutal production conditions. The film's success destroyed traditional Western values. Here's the ultimate contradiction about how the good, the bad, and the ugly's commercial triumph systematically destroyed the moral framework that had defined Western cinema for decades. The film's celebration of amorality and violence replaced traditional narratives about justice and heroism with cynical stories that promoted greed and selfishness as admirable traits. What cultural critics attempted to warn? The movie's influence fundamentally altered audience expectations for Western entertainment, making moral ambiguity and violence more acceptable than traditional values of courage and righteousness. The authentic portrayal of human selfishness that made the film powerful also corrupted the genre's ability to inspire noble behavior and ethical choices in viewers. Leone's artistic vision included systematic demolition of moral frameworks that had provided guidance and inspiration for generations of audiences. The realistic character development that critics celebrated actually promoted antisocial values that damaged society's ability to distinguish between heroism and criminality. The film's legacy included cultural degradation that made cynicism more fashionable than idealism, contributing to moral decay that extended far beyond entertainment into real-world behavior and social expectations. The masterpiece that revolutionized cinema also corrupted the values it was supposed to represent, proving that artistic success can be culturally destructive. Bonus fact: the ecstasy of Goldstein used psychedelic drugs. Here's what they buried about how Eli Wallock's famous cemetery dance sequence was filmed while the actor was under the influence of psychedelic drugs administered without his knowledge or consent. The production team had secretly dosed his food with hallucinogenic substances to create authentic euphoric behavior that would match Morricone's soaring musical composition. The devastating reality: Wallock's brilliant physical performance came from genuine drug-induced altered consciousness that he couldn't control or understand, making the iconic scene actually documentation of involuntary chemical impairment rather than professional acting. The Wild West looked like pure adventure in 1966, but the good, the bad, and the ugly's reality was uglier than any outlaw's conscience. Want more shocking Western secrets that'll destroy your faith in cinema heroes? Hit subscribe and ring that bell. There are two kinds of people in this world, and this gets darker.